This special WRAL-TV 5 sports presentation is sponsored in part by Hardee's. If you're going to go, go all out. Glaxo Welcome, breakthrough medicines for everyday living. Leith Infinity, now open at 7900 Capitol Boulevard, Raleigh. Own one and you'll understand. Sprint, we help your business do more business. And by the Carolina Hurricanes.
Well, it was a rainy day in 1940. 5,000 farmers from all over the state had gathered for Farmers Week. Unfortunately, it rained all week, and there was no place a bit large enough to handle that many people. So Mr. Dave Clark, an alumnus from Charlotte, class of 1894, had a vision, a dream, if you will. He said that State College needs an indoor stadium where rain or shine, 10,000 farmers can get together to solve their problems. He also envisioned this building being used for religious meetings, concerts, ROTC, and sporting events. Thank goodness Dave Clark got caught in the rain that summer of 1940.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Suter. You know, I've been following ACC basketball, I guess, almost as long as I've been alive, and you bet I have many great memories of basketball in the William Neal Reynolds Coliseum. I remember the voice of C.A. Dillon, basket by Pasillo, number 20, in the background of a Ray Reeve broadcast. I remember the ACC tournaments, the Dixie Classic, and of course the old Gray Fox Everett Case, who brought big-time basketball to this state. Who can forget the amazing talent assembled by Norman Sloan in the early 1970s? And of course the magic that Jim Valvano spun in the 1980s. But the story of Reynolds Coliseum is larger than any of this. There's something about this funny-shaped building with some of the best seats in basketball and many of the worst that brings out the best in the Wolfpack and its fans.
I don't think the people who put those steel rafters up in William Neal Reynolds Coliseum could care less if you could hear a cello or not. They wanted that place to shake.
It was deafening. I'm hard of hearing right now, and I give those crowds in William Neal Reynolds Coliseum credit for a lot of my hearing loss.
You couldn't communicate with anybody. You just had to, write things down in the huddle.
The student body makes the game. They got the energy. The fans are the greatest.
This is a difficult place to play when the fans are really on fire.
Fans and the band and everything was, that was tremendous. You was playing on cloud nines.
Wells, Crawford, left-hand dribble, now switches to the right, strip stolen away by Grundy. Grundy down the floor with only Harrington to beat, leaves it off for Harrington, layup good!
I still get goose pimples thinking about certain times in certain games that the roof literally lifted.
Eat, drink, and sleep basketball with Coach Everett Case. That was the theme when I attended Coach Case's basketball camp back in 1960. And so much of what happens in Reynolds Coliseum today can be traced to the man they called the old Gray Fox. Everett Case was the first in these parts to recruit great players. He was the first to emphasize tournaments. And in a state that wasn't basketball savvy at the time, he was the first to promote the game. But the lingering monument of Coach Case's love of NC State basketball is Reynolds Coliseum. Today it's remembered as the house that Case built.
NC State flew the flags of its rivals outside the new Coliseum, but each banner might just as well have been flown at half-staff, because the odds of anyone winning in Everett Case's Raleigh were as long as the hemlines of 1949.
He was the one who brought big-time basketball, major college basketball, to this part of the South.
Schools couldn't give away tickets before Everett Case took over the Wolfpack, but this coach recruited talent. Suddenly, the land of the longleaf pine was invaded by the one-handed shot. Former players recall a growing juggernaut in West Raleigh.
The first thing he did is got great players. Great players fill up a place.
We played with a flair. For one thing, when he first came down, the talent margin was enormous in his favor.
Case, the little dynamo, could light up a locker room, but often the X's and O's stayed on the blackboard. Opponents could not crack the Wolfpack's fast-breaking attack.
When you bought a ticket to an NC State game, you were going to be entertained. The idea was up-tempo, press, run, wide open, great athletes. He did not overcoach.
They started running up scores and 90 and 100 points a ball game, which was, of course, unheard of in those days. I mean, he captured the entire state.
With his persona, his charisma, and his success, and his style of play was something that the people in the area had never seen before.
And Case commemorated every Wolfpack success in color highlight films. And there were tournaments. This pack of wolves would play host to the unsuspecting and the mighty from all across the land. The Gray Fox made Reynolds Coliseum his personal hen house in the Dixie Classic.
The Dixie Classic, which was his brainchild, was certainly an innovation. It was the finest holiday tournament in the nation.
At that time, even more popular than NCAA. The teams from all around the country were riding Everett. Let us play in your tournament.
I never shall forget that Dixie Classic when Oscar Robinson came in here and the Cincinnati team, which was #1 in the country. It was the best Dixie Classic we've ever had. State managed to beat Cincinnati in the semifinal round.
In the Southern Conference and the ACC, State was the team of the 50s, losing the conference tournament just twice. Of course, the tournament was played in Reynolds Coliseum.
You're practicing there for, October, November, December, January, almost 5.5 months. And, as Dean Smith calls it, the dead spots on the court.
It was magnificent having the tournament right here. That'll never happen again. You think back on it, coaches today talk to me about it, ACC coaches, and they said, y'all had the tournament there every year? I said, yeah, we had it there every year. This was a place to have it.
Case's Wolfpack never won the national title. That was a disappointment to him. His 1956 team was ranked 2nd in the country. Here on Tobacco Road, the Wolfpack was #1 throughout most of the late 40s and 50s. In 1964, Everett Case developed cancer and turned the team over to Press Maravich and Charlie Bryant. There would be one last hurrah for the Gray Fox in the ACC tournament of 1965, one of the last to be played here in Reynolds Coliseum. NC State upset mighty Duke.
We brought Everett out on the floor, and it was just such a great feeling to watch Everett reach up there for one more time and clip those nets, because he had done it so many times and set the precedent for excellence in the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Case died less than a year later, and so that he could wave to the Wolfpack team on road trips to Durham and Chapel Hill, he was buried along Highway 70. But his indomitable spirit lives in Reynolds Coliseum still.
Well, in the 1960s, the Wolfpack basketball program went into a decline, only to come roaring back in the 1970s, reaching unprecedented heights, led by one of Coach Case's former players. They called him Stormin' Norman. That next, as we remember Reynolds Coliseum. In 1967, the fiery Norman Sloan became the coach in residence in Reynolds Coliseum. In time, he would recruit David Thompson, Tommy Burleson, Monty Tao, and the players that for 2 seasons did not lose an ACC game. This was one of the great teams in history. Yet those championship dreams were nearly dashed one Saturday in Reynolds Coliseum. Here's Bob Holliday with the story of the rise of the Wolfpack and the fall that had the telephones ringing off the hook.
They remember 44 in Reynolds Coliseum. 44 was not simply David Thompson's number, but the measurement of his vertical leap. 44 inches, nearly 4 feet. No other player in college basketball could jump so high.
David's mother used to tell me, Coach, I worry about David. He gets up so high. I worry about him taking a terrible fall one day.
NC State played Pittsburgh for the Eastern Regional Championship here in Reynolds Coliseum. Now, the Pitt defenders were giving David Thompson trouble. In this corner, twice, they hit his shooting elbow with no foul being called. Frustrated, Thompson ran off to make amends. And when David wanted to retaliate, David would jump higher.
I was determined to go down the opposite end of the court to make up for it. And so I went up to block a guy's shot who was shooting from the corner, and I just took off and jumped up as high as I could. And I kind of went through there pretty recklessly and blocked the shot, but then tripped over Phil Spencer's shoulder.
And as I go like this, I feel a foot hit me and flip over, and I brace it, and there's David, bam, head first, eyes roll back in his head. I mean, he was just unconscious. He was totally out of it. There was no response. And I said, oh my God, I've killed David Thompson.
God, it was the worst looking thing I've ever seen, and he didn't move.
We didn't know if he was going to be a quadriplegic or a paraplegic, or if he'd had vertebral damage or what had happened to him.
And everything went black from there. For a long time, I didn't remember any parts of that basketball game.
From the moment of his fall until his motionless body was lifted onto a stretcher, not one person in Reynolds Coliseum made a sound.
They took David to the hospital. Walter Cronkite called. I understand he's dead. I understand he's a vegetable. We want to know what's the truth. And they said, well, we can't tell you now. We're not through examining him and so forth. He said, I'll stay. He said, we'll call you. He said, no, I'll stay on the line.
A national television audience had seen the fall, and now viewers saw a Wolfpack team that was emotionally on the edge, not knowing whether to quit playing or fight on.
Well, we were ticked off. I mean, we had a point to prove that you just don't do that, especially to our main man.
Stoddard, Noose, and myself, Phil Spence, was incensed. We went out there to break their backs, and we did. Every move, we tried to knock their head off. They had killed our superstar player.
We were struggling. We were struggling. There's no question about it. Guys didn't want to play. I spent the whole halftime encouraging them to go back out and play. I said, David would want you to do this.
Time stood still, or so it seemed, until halftime, when PA announcer C.A. Dillon told the crowd,
I'm happy to report that the doctors have said that he will be all right. And of course, the place just went wild.
Once I came back to, I was okay, and my only concern was about the team and whether they were going to win that basketball game. And so I asked them if I could go back to the game.
Tommy's shooting a free throw, and all of a sudden, every one of them left the floor. I said, good Lord, they've quit.
State's players had seen number 44, and soon the building was in an uproar. David Thompson, wearing a bandage around his head, had returned, guided back to the Wolfpack bench by forces that seemed to be supernatural.
When David come back, it was like a religious experience. All of a sudden, we've won the game. Our leader is back, and then we finally got to focus on what life was more about.
I tell you what, when I saw him, oh, happy day, hallelujah, David is fine, everything's okay, and it was just joyful. We were just so joyful to see David back with us.
They stopped the game, right in the middle of the game, and guys came over and hugged me, and there was tears, and so it was very emotional.
It was just like a returning war hero coming back or whatever. I mean, the place just went wow.
The next week, the state team, carrying a new perspective about the meaning of basketball when measured against the life of a teammate, took on 7-time national champion UCLA. College basketball's Goliath was slain by David and his Wolfpack teammates in double overtime. 2 days later, State beat Marquette, ending the Atlantic Coast Conference's long years of empty trips to the Final Four.
Wolfpack national champion!
And when the team returned to Raleigh, David, Tall Tommy, and their teammates began to understand how much their victory meant to the basketball-loving people of their community.
Couldn't believe the response of the students and the whole city. It was very, very special.
So we come into Reynolds, loosey-goosey, being national champs, swaying and enjoying ourselves, and then bam, 10,000 people, talk to the crowd, 10,000 people, what am I supposed to say?
Oh, man.
I remember Greg Hawkins, he was kind of the clown of the team, walking across the stage on his hands. I remember standing out there and raising up my finger, number one, and saying something.
And thanks a lot for help making us number one. All right, let's go.
It was something that David and I had lived for. The fans themselves were just, they were elated that David and I would be able to, as two North Carolinians, would be able to lead their team to their first national championship.
And you don't know how much I love this damn team back here.
And to come back with so many people that's so thankful and so appreciative, and to make you feel like you're somebody, to me that was the greatest moment maybe of my life.
So it was Norman Sloan, one of Everett Case's former players, who brought closure to the Gray Foxes' dream of a national championship at NC State. While Sloan, who carried a strong sense of State's rich basketball heritage, was the first to win a title, he would not be the last. That story coming up next as we remember Reynolds Coliseum. The spring of 1980, the late Jim Valvano arrived in West Raleigh. Man, he was something. Talking a mile a minute to just about anyone who would listen. The new basketball. A brilliant tactician, he quickly won the hearts of Wolfpack fans. Now, Valvano was, of course, the master motivator, and never was this more apparent in the championship run in 1983. But on the way to the national championship, it's easy to forget that at one time, the Pack was just 9-7 and coming off a poor road trip. Terry Gannon remembers a team meeting in Reynolds.
I remember V saying, okay, so maybe we have to change our goals. Maybe the NIT is where we should. Let's go to the Big Apple. Let's go back to New York and let's win that one then. We're going to be one of two teams to finish having won our last game in the college basketball season. So we proceed to start winning, and Wittenberg comes back, and we go on this joy ride and somehow are the team of destiny. And at the end of it all, after winning a national championship, we all say, we knew it all the time.
The magic of Coach V. He could weave it, couldn't he? No State fan will ever forget that '83 team that, against all odds, put together one of the great championship runs in college history. Later, Valvano became athletic director as well as coach. But in 1990, still very popular. He was forced to resign with an NCAA cloud hanging over the basketball program. Valvano was in television in 1992 when he developed cancer. In February of 1993, it was a dying but courageous Jim Valvano who returned to a packed and emotional Reynolds Coliseum to make one final curtain call in the Coliseum he loved so much.
But then when he arrived here at Reynolds and in one of the back rooms here, he could barely move, sat him down in the chair. He could talk to you, but he couldn't really even turn to look at you because he was in such pain at the time.
We were playing Duke that day, and Mike came to speak to him, and that sort of helped because they had gotten a special relationship over the last month.
Jim was so good about seizing the moment, you know, and making the most of the moment.
Somehow he got the strength to walk out onto the court. And from that moment, as soon as he heard the crowd, I don't know if the pain went away, but it certainly looked like it.
I remember sitting on the bench, and he looked up at me and he said, I'm not going to be able to speak. He said, I'm going to cry. And I said, it's okay if you cry. I said, because there are a lot of people that are going to be crying with you.
Let me tell you what the '83 team means to me. They're special, not because they put that banner up there. They're special because they taught me and the world so many important lessons. Number one, hope. What does hope mean? Hope that things can get better in spite of adversity. The '83 team taught me about dreaming and the importance of dreams, because nothing can happen if not first a dream. If you have someone with a dream, if you have a motivated person with a dream and a goal and a vision, if you have someone who never gives up, who has great hope, and that team taught me the persistence, the idea of never, ever quitting. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop fighting. And the '83 team gave you hope, gave you pride, told you what hard work was about. It gave you the meaning of believing in a cause. And lastly, what they taught me, which is so important, is to love each other. Thurl, I love you. And Terry, I love you. And Whit, I love you. They taught me what love means when you have a goal, when you have a dream, and when you have a belief, and you throw in that concept of never stop believing and loving in each other, and you can accomplish miracles. And that's what the '83 team taught.
If you were able to sit through that in Reynolds that day and not have a tear in your eye, check your pulse, because you don't have one.
On the terms that he left were very, very difficult for him, and coming back and seeing the signs, you know, Jimmy V, never give up, and things like that. I think it was very therapeutic. I think that it made him feel a little bit better about everything.
Everyone talks about his ESPY speech, but I don't think it was any better than the speech he gave to the people he loved in the place that he loved.
One time. Na, 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 na. Thank you, and God bless you, everybody. Thank you very much.
The end of this college basketball season will mark the end of one of the great eras in college basketball. Raucous Reynolds Coliseum. When the Pack was on a roll, no building anywhere was louder, no atmosphere was more electric. Big games, big tournaments, big-time players, and great coaches. That old, funny-shaped building played host to them all. We want to leave you tonight with a very special Jeff Gravely photo essay as we pay final tribute to a basketball shrine, the house that Case built. So long, everybody. So long, Reynolds Coliseum.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the William Neal Reynolds Coliseum.
Only 13 seconds to go. Maglio down the middle. Just look at him.
Circle down to the right side to Engelhard. Back to Priscilla. Right corner. Jumps 40 feet out. Scores.
Grandest night for the Wolfpack, which wins the Dixie Classic.
Thompson goes high in the air, tries to block the shot and hits the deck very hard. Wolfpack ball at midcourt. Wally Alsley with Jerry Dornberg. Inbounds to Bailey back to low.
What cancer cannot touch is my mind, my heart, and my soul.
Another downtown for Whitburn.
It'll pull up though, 3 on the way, bullseye!
Ball game is over, Wolfpack national champion! Whitburn tries about a 30-footer, no good, step back, Lorenzo Charles, stay!
There's something that we all feel protective about this building that has meant so much to our lives. She's like an old battleship that they're getting ready to retire, you know, and you served on it out there in World War II, and I call her she. She's something special.